Okay, it says record.
Okay. Erica Cass here. I was meeting with Jonathan Ward, and he had to leave because as a street outreach worker, when duty calls, duty calls. We were also having some technical difficulties in the field, so he's out doing outreach with clients. We didn't get a chance to let you know that he is a Howard social work alumni, and so now we're going to switch gears. I'm here with Michelle May at the DC Department of Mental Health. Good afternoon, Miss May. How are you?
Hi, Erica. How are you?
Good. How are you? And you also are a Howard alumni, right?
That's right.
Well, when were you there?
I went to Howard from 1993 to 95.
Great. Well, it's great to see. It's great to see you what you're doing now. If you could let us know your title and what your position is here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm the Homeless Services Coordinator here at the DC Department of Mental Health. And I oversee contract for drop-in center services. We help train psychiatry residents by placing them in shelter settings so that they can increase their knowledge of working in true community-based services, learning how to be a psychiatrist out in the community, on the street, in shelter. Then we have an outreach team that sort of goes out into shelters and street corners and does assessments for people who are homeless and mentally ill, and links to services. And we do a lot with community building with the Homeless Provider Network, and training and advocacy within our system on how to best serve the population and what kind of service area would be most helpful for people who are homeless.
Well, great. Thank you for that overview. How would you describe the population that you're working with?
So we have several kinds of target populations. We work with families who are homeless, who may have children or adults in the family who need to be linked to services. We work with people who are on the street, who are really quite marginalized and vulnerable, and in need of a lot of support to mainstream into traditional mental health settings. We also work with a population in the winter who are intoxicated, and so we provide a night shelter for them. So that's a somewhat different population. I think what pulls them all together is that they're pretty disenfranchised from the traditional mental health system and other service delivery systems, and so they tend to really need safety net, very much a safety net service system to really kind of protect them. So our clients are generally at pretty high risk of safety in the community.
If you could elaborate on those in your population that are living on the street and suffering from a mental illness, and tell me about some of the work you're doing with that population.
One of the big things that we feel is very important when we work with people who are homeless is to support the network that knows that population as well. So we work very closely with street outreach agencies that are focused in regions of the city, and so we'll link up with them to become familiar with their client population, help them understand how to make referrals into the system, how to make assessment. We will assess their clients as well and work with them on a plan. Sometimes people need a short stay in a hospital setting to stabilize. We're always sort of looking out for risk factors like hypothermia injuries, infections that people really aren't taking care of, so self-neglect issues, and whether they may be at risk of harm to themselves or others, just as a basic thing that we try to look to do. And then we might try to make referrals for them into intensive community-based services, and then we might help that system and the outreach system work together to serve that client and engage them individually. Everybody needs a different an individualized engagement plan, so we really try to work hard on how to link those things together. And ultimately the goal is to have somebody not be outside, and sort of in a safer setting, and with a provider network that will support their goals. So.
Speaking of individual plans for people get to their unique situations, what direct service theories that you learned at Howard, the Black perspective, strength perspective, and other such things, do you feel you're utilizing with this population?
Um, I think I just have always known that concrete offerings for this population was very important. Things I learned at Howard about meeting the client where they're at, not only sort of where their social service needs are, but physically where they're at. You always go to where they are and you start with what they want to talk about. And I just think that that was one of the most critical things that I ever learned at Howard, and how to make people feel helped, I think, was another thing that I learned a lot about. We deal with a really multi-ethnic, multiracial population, and you really want the person to feel like you're helpful to them, however you do that. Working with a population that's been disenfranchised because they're low income, they're in poverty, they've experienced racism in a lot of different ways, and they've been marginalized, and so we always try to make the client the center of the focus, and also to build the community around that person. We know in minority populations that there's a community that's available to us. It may be a faith-based community, it may be a family, it may be a shelter community, and we do feel as though that we need to draw those folks in to strengthen, the safety network for the person, and I think that's something else I learned a lot about at Howard.
Well, thank you. If you could briefly think of maybe a compilation of clients that you've worked with, of course we know about respecting confidentiality, but just sort of the typical situation that person that's homeless and mentally ill, maybe with schizophrenia, and a success story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a lot of success stories every year. It's hard, I think, for people to understand that on the outside, but every single year we have people who get better, who get off the street, who move into housing, who start developing a support system. And so there's tremendous success, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And sometimes really it's quite organic, and the sun, moon, and stars just collide at the right moment in time for somebody, and things start going in that direction, and you have to be ready at all times. But there, in particular, there was a person up in the Friendship Heights area who had a pretty complex set of symptoms and diagnoses. He actually wasn't schizophrenic in the end, but a lot of people thought he was, and so they kind of based their treatments on this diagnosis that was not correct. And he had multiple medical problems, and we really had to look at when he could make decisions for himself and when he couldn't. And there came a time when we did have to bring him into a hospital against his will, although fairly quickly he got quite comfortable there and quite happy. And after a few months, we had identified a guardian for him that would help him. With budgeting and decision making and identifying housing, signing leases. This person wasn't comfortable putting his signature on things, or sharing information about his financial matters and stuff. And ultimately, we got one housing setting for him, and he left almost immediately. Mm-hmm. But he was found again in another part of the area, and he now lives in his own apartment. And has home health providers that come in, and he has funds that come in every month, and I think Meals on Wheels. And this person had been out on the street for probably 15 or 20 years. His family isn't fully engaged with him anymore. Most of them aren't living anymore, but there's I think there's still a sister that's around, and that was a tremendous success because everybody in his community was worried about him all the time, very distressed, and it was so hard to find the right strategy and the right path for him, but it did happen, and he's no longer outside. So we were very pleased about that.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And as a side note to the viewers, Michelle May, I'm lucky enough, will be my field instructor next year for my second year placement where I will be. So what, as we close, what advice do you have for me and for other students who are going to be going into this working on the streets of D.C. with folks who are homeless and mentally ill?
Mm-hmm. Advice. Well, I tell you, if you don't want to fight, if you don't want to be an advocate, I wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. But I really do think for social workers that we really need to see ourselves as advocates for the most disenfranchised group. And so you really have to want to go in there and fight for the client and stay very focused on the client and sort of don't get caught up in jargon and other kinds of things like that.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm wishing you the best.